Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome back to another viewer question episode. And on today's video, the question that I want to answer was submitted to me by a friend of mine. We've talked on Facebook quite a bit. Seems like an absolutely great guy. So Michael, if you're watching this, this is one of your questions. And the question was, basically a lot of people are playing D&D 5th edition these days. And a lot of people are starting with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So for people that are starting their D&D journey with 5th edition, are there any books from previous editions that I would recommend that they pick up? And it's actually a really interesting question. I like that one quite a bit. I think for the purposes of this video, I want to stick to books that are a little bit more recent. So I'm kind of looking at 3rd edition onwards. There are some great books for, AD&D and probably even 2nd edition that you may want to consider picking up. A lot of just informational books. The original 1st edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide has a lot of great information on running games, and it's something that if you have the ability, if you can find it and pick it up, then I definitely recommend it. There's also things like the Wilderness Survival Guide and the Dungeon Survival Guide for 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons that may be worth looking into as well. The reason that I'm not going to focus a whole lot on those early books is that they're hard to find, at least in my experience. I haven't really found too many of those books out in the wild, aside from when someone basically traded their 1st edition AD&D collection into my friend's store back when he had it, and that's how I got all the books that I have now. Beyond that, really the only books I've ever found out in the wild for 1st edition tend to be like the Player's Handbook and the Unearthed Arcana, which is not one that I'd really recommend because that's all about options and new things for 1st edition AD&D. But there are some great books that you can get for 3rd edition, 3.5, and even in a few books in 4th edition that you may want to consider as far as just getting some information to expand on ideas that are presented in like the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. So to start off with, the first thing I want to talk about is a series of books known as the Races series for 3.5. Now this is the gift set, which has the Races of Stone, Races of Destiny, and Races of the Wild. So these books have a lot of great information just on the various races, including things like what a typical day in the life of each race, like dwarves, elves, humans, orcs, or half-orcs I should say, and so on and so forth. There's just a lot of great information on their organizations, on what their homes would be like. Just a lot of really great flavor. Now there are some rule stuff in here as well that's not really going to carry over, but some of the things that are in this book may give you inspiration for things you can add into your homebrewed 5th edition D&D game. For example, each of the major races has what's called substitution class features, where they forego one of the regular ones in favor of something else. Now in addition to these three, there were 2 other books released called Races of Eberron and Races of the Dragon, which I have back here. So I'll just show those off. So I'm going to set this down. So we got Races of Eberron, which does pretty much the same thing for the Everon races. And then Races of the Dragon is really cool because it has the kobolds in this. Now they have a version of Dragonborn in this book, and this is the one that I would recommend the least if you were looking to get these racial flavor books. The main reason is that the kobold's the only race in this book that actually appears in 5th edition. There are, like I said, Dragonborn in this book, but they are a racial template, which was something that was new in 3rd edition. And I think these were the only ones that actually ever did it. But instead of being like the Dragonborn race that we know from 4th edition and 5th edition, they started off as a different race and then were transformed. So this is the one that I'd recommend the absolute least. If you want to get more of an Everon feel into your games, or you want to run a 5th edition Everon game but you don't know much about the system or the races, then this is a great book. Otherwise, the other races books are great just for the flavor text, the flavor that they add to your D&D games. Not so much for the rule stuff like the feats and prestige classes, and you can kind of ignore all that stuff, but if you just want some flavor, then those are good ones to get. And they're usually not too expensive when I found them out at used stores. I tend to find them for like $15 to $20. So, the next book that I want to recommend is for the Forgotten Realms itself, and that is The Grand History of the Realms. And what this is a system neutral book, so there are no rules information in this whatsoever. But what this is it's basically a massive timeline of the Forgotten Realms setting from, from its origins up to foreshadowing the events that would take place around the time of 4th edition with the Spell Plague. So it doesn't really go from the Spell Plague up to current, but if you're looking to build on your knowledge or history of the Forgotten Realms, then this book is the way to go. It does an excellent job of that. The next thing that I would recommend, if you're looking to just sort of expand your knowledge on certain aspects of the 5th edition game, I want to talk about some planar stuff now. So the first thing I want to recommend is the box set, if you can find it, of the Shadowfell. Now this came out for D&D 4th edition, came out after the D&D Essentials line was released. But this is great because it goes into quite a bit of information about the Shadowfell itself, in more detail than what you would get in the DMG. It also comes with some maps that you can use, as well as just some ideas for how the Shadowfell can affect you. Basically, you kind of fall into despair while you're in the Shadowfell, and there's actually some cards that are in here that basically, if you fall into this despair and you become sort of depressed or affected by the nature of the Shadowfell, then they give you these penalties. And when you complete a long rest, you can try to shake them off, and if you do so, then you can, gain actually a minor benefit. So there'd be kind of a cool idea to implement. You have to make some changes because these were for the 4th edition rule system, but just using the basis of what those cards have on them for penalties and then positives, this would be, again, a great product, and it goes into a lot more information about the Shadowfell, which was one of my favorite additions that 4th edition brought to the D&D game, was this plane. Instead of just being the regular plane of shadow, I much prefer the way that they did the Shadowfell itself. Alright, speaking of the planar stuff, the next few books that I want to suggest are just to, again, expand your knowledge of the planes themselves. So the first one is the Manual of the Planes. So the books with the name Manual of the Planes have been printed for 1st edition AD&D, 3.0, and for 4th edition. I don't have the 1st edition AD&D version. Unfortunately, it's like the only hardcover 1st edition AD&D book that I'm missing. But I do have the 3rd edition Manual of the Planes that I just recently picked up from a friend of mine. And I've got the 4th edition version. So which of these two is best? It really depends on your kind of personal beliefs and thoughts on the cosmology. So the Manual of the Planes for 3.0, or for the 3rd edition one, is a bit more closer match to the way that the cosmology has been redone for 5th edition. So it has like the individual elemental planes. It's got a lot of great information on the planes, and you're not going to go wrong with either one of these books. I mean, I'd highly recommend either one of these. I absolutely love the fact that I finally have this in my collection. It's fantastic. It's great. But overall, I prefer the 4th edition style cosmology. So I would recommend this one over perhaps the other. Now, again, they both give you a lot of decent information, and you can't go wrong with either. So if you're looking to expand your planar knowledge, either one is great. The 3rd edition, I think, has maybe a little bit more detail on some of the planes. So that may be the way to go, but this is also a great book to pick up. Now, the reason that I love the 4th edition cosmology a bit more is I really like the two elements of the astral sea and the elemental chaos. I just like the way that that works, and I prefer the elemental chaos over the individual elemental planes. The main point for the elemental chaos is that it contains all the different elements. So you've got earth, air, fire, and water all sort of mixed in throughout, which they basically did because when you look at the elemental planes, most of them have things that would come from other planes. So for example, the elemental plane of fire, there's still going to be solid ground just to walk on, which is earth. There will still be breathable air, since living creatures can be there. So it just sort of has a mix of everything. And I liked the way that it was handled better in 4th edition personally, saying that all these things just exist together in this turbulent mishmash of chaos. So from that perspective, If you're looking to go sort of beyond just the manual of the planes, there are the plane below and the plane above books. So a guide to the Astral Sea, or Secrets of the Astral Sea, and Secrets of the Elemental Chaos. And again, these books both go into great detail and information on each of those two aspects. So the Astral Sea contains several of the other planes of existence, like it has the 9 hells of Bator there. Just more or less quite a few different things. I want to say that Mechanus is there as well. And just quite a few different planes actually belong to the Astral Sea. It's basically like sort of like the heavenly realm sort of idea. Yeah, it's got Celestia, the 9 hells, just a lot of really cool places and information that's in these books. And the same goes for the Elemental Chaos, which has like the Abyss and other places in there as well. So those are books that I'd recommend. There are a few monster books, monster-specific books that just give a lot of detailed information about monster ecologies, physical anatomies, tactics, things along those lines. So from that perspective, books that I would recommend would be the 3.5 Dragonomicon. Now this book is absolutely amazing. It does have a lot of rule stuff that would be specific to the 3rd edition, like draconic feats and spells, which you can use as sort of a basis of inspiration for giving dragons new abilities in the 5th edition game, if you're the kind of person that likes to introduce your own material. But it also just goes over things like, their physical anatomy. It explains how their breath weapons work. Kind of goes over details on their typical layers. Like, for example, we've got sort of an example of a red dragon lair. And there's just a lot of really great information in this book about the various breeds of dragons. So this book is one of, probably, I would put it in my top 3 favorite D&D books of all time. That's how much I love this book. So this is one that, again, if you really want to use dragons and make your dragons sort of come to life or have a better understanding of how to use them, then this is an excellent, excellent resource. Alright, another type of monster that I really love are aberrations, specifically beholders. Beholders, like this guy back here, are my all-time favorite D&D monster. And honestly, I really did not like the way that they explained them in Volo's Guide to Monsters for 5th edition. Now, it is stated that in the book, Elminster has this little snarky remark saying that the information provided may not necessarily be accurate. And I take that to heart when it comes to beholders. I hate the notion that beholders simply dream themselves into existence, or dream other beholders into existence, or that they transform themselves based on their own dreams and nightmares. It's an interesting idea, but I just really don't like it. It just doesn't work for me personally. I love the way that they handled beholders in Lords of Madness, which is right up there with the Dragonomicon for me. Excuse me, in terms of my favorite D&D books of all time. So this has like mind flayers, beholders, several different aboleths, information on each of those types of monsters, as well as a few other, like the Neogi, which I think are in, I want to say that they're in Volo's Guide to Monsters. I want to say I've seen them in 5th edition, but I may be wrong there. But there's just a lot of really great information about each of these types of creatures in here. And my favorite thing, again, when it comes to the beholders, is it actually explains their reproductive cycle in a way that's utterly disgusting. Don't get me wrong, it's gross and it's horrible to think about, but it makes more sense than they just dream other beholders into existence. So I love the way that they handled beholders in this book, and there's just a lot of really great information. I mean, just going down to, just to show sort of an example, like the anatomy of the beholder, the anatomy of their eyes. So again, this just presents the information way better in my opinion than what Volo's Guide to Monsters did. So if you're looking for some monster information books, the Dragonomicon and Lords of Madness are the two that I recommend the most. If you're looking for Devils and Demons, there are the Fiendish Codexes from 3rd to 3.5 as well. Tyrants of the 9 Hells, and Hordes of the Abyss. So if you're kind of looking to run adventures with demons or devils, then those books are there as well, and they're great. There was an undead one referred to as Libris Mortis, and I thought that book sucked. I really didn't like it. I was hoping that it would have information similar to what the Dragonomicon did, because it came out between the Dragonomicon and Lords of Madness, and it just didn't really do anything for me. Like, I wanted to go into information on things like Death Knights and Liches, and really kind of treat them the same way that the Dragonomicon was in terms of like their ecologies and all these different sorts of things, and it just really didn't deliver on that. It was more like, here are just some alternate types of these creatures, and there you go. So I didn't like that one very much, but Lords of Madness, Dragonomicon, the two Fiendish Codexes, can't go wrong there. Alright, so the last things that I kind of want to go over are just some campaign settings if you want to run Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I had mentioned the grand history of the realms before, if you're looking for Forgotten Realms information. There is also the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. And the one that I would recommend, the one that's closest to the current version of the Forgotten Realms that exists right now, would be the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms setting. Now, I still think, really deep down, honestly, that Wizards of the Coast needs to release an updated campaign setting for 5th edition. But if you can find a copy of this, which isn't easy to do, and probably not the cheapest ones, I think these tend to hold their value pretty decently. But if you can find one of these, then absolutely, pick it up. And there's a lot of excellent information on the Forgotten Realms itself. It goes into a fair amount of detail on the different regions. The only thing is that the information, again, is going to be a little bit out of date, because this came out during the 3.0 era. So this was in, I want to say 2001 or 2002 that this came out. So this is several years old. Let's see if I can find the date easily here. 2001. So this is 16 years old at this point. A lot's kind of happened since then, but this still gives you a lot of useful information on the realms themselves. So if you're looking to expand your Forgotten Realms beyond the Sword Coast or Chult, then this is a decent book to pick up. Personally, I didn't mind the 4th edition setting, which is this one right here. I didn't mind a lot of the changes that were made, mostly because I had some bad experiences running Forgotten Realms games in the past, where players who had read the novels felt the need to correct me on things that I did differently than what was presented in the novels. And the 4th edition setting did change that quite a bit. They changed the world in a lot of drastic ways. I liked a lot of the changes, and I mean, I'm a Forgotten Realms person, like that's my favorite setting. But I like I said, just because I didn't want to be in the situation where the players that read more of the books than I did say, well, actually, this is how this actually happened, or it just gets kind of frustrating. So, like I said, I didn't mind these changes, and you can probably pick this up for a little bit cheaper than the 3rd edition's version of the setting, if you're able to find it. So, either one is fine. The 3.0 version is a little bit closer to how they present the realms today, but the 4th edition one is changed around quite a bit. There are some drastic changes. Like I said, in this version, Chult is actually an island instead of a peninsula. And I'll be honest, for it being such an unexplored and dangerous region, I actually kind of like the idea of it being an island better. But anyway, so those are two things that you could also look at if you're looking to do some campaign settings. Now, there are also the Everon setting. I showed off the Racist of Eberron a little bit earlier. So, if you want to run an Everon campaign setting, there are two different versions of the setting itself. There's the 3.5 version, and there is the 4th edition setting for Everon. Both of them are very similar, so you really couldn't go wrong with either. Honestly, I think this one might be a little bit easier to find than the 3rd edition version. I could be wrong, but I think I've seen this a couple more times in game stores than I have the 3rd edition version. But again, both of these are very similar in information, not much change between the two. So if you're looking to just kind of create a campaign in the Everon setting, then this is the one, this is the way to go, and I recommend it quite highly. In fact, Everon, I can easily say, is a setting that I love more and more as time goes on. Like, I wasn't too keen on it when I first heard about it, but when I actually started reading the information, it became, you know, a quick favorite of mine. And I would put it just below the Forgotten Realms at this point for settings that I really want to run games in and really enjoy. And I'm hoping that with 5th edition we do start to see some Everon support, because I think that would be fantastic. Alright, another one of the major settings that is supported by 5th edition in so much that it gets mentioned and referenced a few times is Dragonlance. So, you know, I've got the 3rd edition Dragonlance campaign setting here. So this has a lot of information on just the world of Kryn, some of the things that you can find in here. And Dragonlance is a pretty cool setting. It's actually this is the first campaign setting book I ever bought. I actually owned this before I picked up my Forgotten Realms setting. So this is a really great book, and again, if you're looking to run a campaign based off of the Dragonlance series, or you want to run one in the Dragonlance world, this is still pretty, I don't want to say it's easy to find, but I think it's, you know, decently easy to find this version of it, more so than the 1st edition AD&D Dragonlance Adventures. So this is one that, again, if you're looking to run in Dragonlance, highly recommend. And the last two are, again, just for campaign settings. If you want to run Greyhawk. Greyhawk has not been heavily supported since way back in the 2nd edition AD&D days. So if you're looking for the fully fleshed out campaign setting, the most recent version of that would be back in 2nd edition, which I think came in a box set if I recall correctly. However, there are some 3rd edition pieces of information on Greyhawk itself. One of the cheapest versions that you can possibly get would just be the Dungeons & Dragons Gazetteer. So this came out during the time of 3.0. This released way back in 2000, so this is right when 3rd edition was first coming out. If you're lucky, you can get one that comes with the map. And this is very basic information. So it doesn't necessarily go into a lot of detail, but it gives you a little bit of information on the different regions within the Greyhawk world. And this is usually fairly cheap to pick up. You can probably get this for around, you know, I want to say between $5 to $10. I think I paid $10 for this version. Now I live in Canada, so things tend to be a little bit more expensive. But this is an absolutely great product. However, if you're lucky enough to find it, a much better version of that Gazetteer exists, which is the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. And this was the campaign setting information for the Living Greyhawk RPGA game. RPGA was the Role Playing Game Association, and it's very similar to what we would have now with Adventurers League, more or less, but this just goes into a lot of really great information. It's got like all the different heraldry and crests on the covers. It goes into great information about the regions, as well as some pretty decent information about the gods themselves from the Greyhawk setting. So another great book to pick up. And that's more or less it at this point in time. I'm sure there are some other books that you can look at if you're looking to expand, just sort of your selection of flavor for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. For example, with the campaign settings, Forgotten Realms and Everon both had a ton of supplements that were based off of different geographic regions. So if you're looking to run an Everon game, you know, you could pick up Sharn, City of Towers. The Five Nations book is great. Pretty much all the Everon books are good for flavor to carry over into 5th edition, with the exception of like Magic of Everon, which wasn't very great, or Dragons of Eberron was kind of disappointing. But if you want things like Zendrick, you want to explore that, then you've got that. You've got Secrets of Sarlona. They also released a source book for Stormreach, which was the major settlement on the continent of Zendrick. So all of those are great. All of those are useful resources, and Forgotten Realms has a lot of stuff similar. They had Unapproachable East, which is for like the land of Thay, Mulhorand, Unther, and all those places like that. They had Shining South. They had books like The Underdark, which was really good. As well as they even had one specifically for Waterdeep. So they had Waterdeep City of Splendors. So if you wanted to run adventures or things based in the city of Waterdeep itself, then that book has all the information that you would need to do that. So there's just some ideas of books that you can get for older editions. Now again, 2nd edition AD&D and even 1st edition AD&D had some great books in there as well. They had Dragonlance Adventures, Greyhawk Adventures, the Dungeon Master's Guide was great. Things like the Wilderness Survival Guide and Dungeoneer Survival Guide are very useful books as well for kind of creating or having your players do stuff in like wilderness or dungeon settings. So those are books that maybe want to consider picking up as well. I don't own a lot of second edition stuff. It's a bit sad, but my second edition collection is probably my thinnest. So there's not a lot there that I can really personally recommend, aside from maybe a few box sets like the Greyhawk's campaign setting. They also had things like, if you want to expand your Forgotten Realms even further, there's the Al-Qadim setting, which was more like the Arabia setting. There was Maztica, which was sort of like a South American style with like the Aztecs. And then there was Karatura, which was more of an Oriental type of setting, as far as I recall. So if you even find those for second edition, that can expand your collection as well. So anyway, if anybody watching here has some other suggestions on books from various editions that would make a great addition to a DM's collection who wants to run 5th edition D&D, please post that in the comments below. I'm interested to hear what you guys think for some additional supplements, other books that may be, useful. The criteria that I looked at was purely from a flavor standpoint, which books would add the most flavor to a campaign. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear your suggestions, and hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if there's any questions that you want me to answer on video, don't hesitate to ask. I try to do at least one a week at this point. So again, thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.